بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم أو مسلمة أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. First and foremost, I would like to thank all the brothers and sisters who have attended today's course. And today's course, the third in the series of the Khulafa Rashideen course, is about the life and the times, is about the struggles, is about the difficulty and the eventual martyrdom of the third Khalif of Islam, known as Dhul-Nurayn, the son-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyiduna Hazrat Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, like we have been doing over the past couple of courses, what we will do is that we will look at the notes which have been given in the course book. And also we will be looking at the additional notes which I have made, which can be seen on the PowerPoint presentation which is in front of you. Now we will begin firstly with Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu, his name and his lineage. So he explains that his full name was Uthman ibn Affan ibn Abul As. So Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu, his father's name was Affan. And his Kunya, and the word Kunya or the term Kunya I explained before, is like an Arab word which has the word Abu at the beginning. And generally speaking, it's used for someone who has a son, the father of Sulaiman, Abu Sulaiman, the father of Yahya, Abu Yahya, the father of Idris, Abu Idris. It's normally or generally speaking used for someone who is a father, someone who is a parent. So it's a respectable way of addressing him. I also mentioned in the previous courses that it's not necessary that someone who is not a father, that he can't have this particular kunya or title, because there are examples of companions like Abdullah bin Mas'ud ta'ala anhu, who did not have a child, but his kunya was Abu Abdullah, the father of Abdullah. And there's also a very famous hadith in Bukhari, Sunan Abu Dawud, Sunan Tirmidhi, where there was a young child, and Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam called him Aba Umair, or father of Umair, even though he was only a bachcha, a young child. And from there the ulamas have derived, it's not a particular ruling, but I'm just telling you for barakah and purposes, that somebody who doesn't have a child, then tafawulan means that out of barakah or blessings, if he was to keep a kunya, if he was to have a title like father of so and so, then the ulamas have said that perhaps through this barakah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may grant him and give him tawfiq of a child later. So as I was saying, that this word kunya is a title, a respectable title the Arabs would use to describe or to address someone, and the kunya of Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was that his name or his kunya was Abu Amr. Now moving along to the next part of the paragraph or the slide. Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, his laqab or his title was known as Dhul-Nurayn, the possessor of two lights. So he had his kunya, which was Abu Amr, but then he had a title. And remember, the two are different. One is, like as I was saying, to address someone in a respectable way. So Abu Sulaiman, Abu this, Abu that. But then you have a title. Like, if one is a modern day example, a title could be, say, Maulana, Mufti, Sheikh. So the title to describe Sayyidina Uthman was that he was called Dhul-Nurayn, the possessor of two lights. And one of the reasons, there's two reasons why he was called the possessor of two lights. One reason is mentioned in the slide there, that he, I Sayyidina Uthman was subhanallah blessed with the honor to be married to two of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's daughters. Not one, but to two. He was initially married to Sayyida Ruqayya radiallahu ta'ala anha, as we're going to look at later when she passed away during the Battle of Badr. Thereafterwards, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam offered his other daughter, whose name was Kulthum, to Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And it's mentioned that no person, no human being, from Adam alayhi salam's time all the way until Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, no human being, no insan, no person had ever married two daughters, one after the other, of a prophet other than Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Many people have married daughters of prophets. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, he was also a prophet as well, but he married the daughter of Shu'aib alayhi salatu wasalam. So many people have married daughters of prophets. But no one ever in this world, since the creation of Adam alayhi salam all the way up to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has a human being or a person married two daughters of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one after the other. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu married a daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a Fatima, but that was the only one. But Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, a fazilat, a virtue of his, an excellence of his, is that he married two daughters of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one after the other. So that is one reason why he was given the title of Dhul-Nurayn. Another reason of why he was given the title Dhul-Nurayn, and we'll touch on this later on about his taqwa and his piety, was that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, he would recite the Holy Quran a great deal in his prayer every night. And the Quran is light, and praying Qiyamul Layl is also light as well. Because Dhul-Nurayn means the possessor of two lights. So one opinion is that two lights are referring to the two daughters of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the second opinion, brothers and sisters, is that the word Dhul-Nurayn is referring to the two lights, i.e. the Holy Quran, and number two, Qiyamul Layl, i.e. night prayers. And we look at this, as I was saying later on, that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, in one rakat, not two rakats, not four, but in a single rakat, he would do one Quran khatam. He would do one completion of the Holy Quran. And we look at it later on regarding his martyrdom, that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu was reading Quran when he was beheaded and when he was executed. So this is a great, and inshallah we'll touch on it later, but a great companion or a sign of someone's taqwa and piety is how much link and connection they have with the Holy Quran. It's not just about reading it and then not acting upon it at all. It's not about just acting upon it and then not reading it, but the two goes hand in hand. You have to read the Holy Quran regularly, and also you have to act upon it as well. So Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, constantly he would recite the Holy Quran, and because of, and not only that, but he would also recite it in his tahajjud and in his qiyamul layl prayers. Because of that reason, he was given the name Dhul-Nurayn, the possessor of two lights. Moving along with regards to his birth, he goes on to explain that he was born 6 years after the year of the elephants. And again, the year of the elephants, I explained earlier in the 2 courses which we've had already, is that time when Abraha, the governor of Yemen, wanted to conquer the Baytullah and destroy the Baytullah and take over Makkah Mukarramah. So he was on that year, the year of the elephants, when Prophet ﷺ was born. So 6 years later, Sayyidina Uthman was born, and he goes on to explain that he was approximately 5 to 6 years younger than Rasulullah ﷺ. Moving on to the next part of the life and the seerah of Sayyidina Uthman, a few things about his physical attributes. Now, Sayyidina Uthman, he was neither short nor tall. He was soft-skinned with a huge, thick beard, big boned, broad shoulders with thick hair on his head, and he used to dye his beard with saffron. Now, the attributes here which are given of Sayyidina Uthman, when we observe it closely, we can find similarities with Rasulullah's physical features and attributes, and also similarities with Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu's features and his attributes. Now, I'm sure all of you have read the Shama'il or are aware of the life, the biography, the seerah and the physical features of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of the beauty of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam about his mold and about his features is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him everything in the middle. Everything about Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was about taking the middle path. Ummatan wasata. So whenever it came to rulings, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the ummah would take the easy option. Whenever it came to rulings, he would always take the middle path, the sirat al-mustaqim. And similarly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his features was also everything was middle as well. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't too tall, and nor was he too short. Because being too tall and lanky is not actually a good quality, it's not a good feature. And being short and a midget, that is also not a good feature as well. The Prophet ﷺ was in the middle. Similarly, the amount of hair he had on his body, he was always in between, in the middle. He wasn't too hairy, but nor was he hairless. Whereas Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab, I mentioned in the previous course, he was a bit more like broad shoulders, his hands were big, he would tower over people, his broad shoulders, big bones, everything. And when we look at the features of Sayyidina Uthman, it's similar to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of height, that he wasn't too tall and nor was he too short. And he's similar to Sayyidina Uthman in terms of his physique, Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab in terms of his physique, in terms of he was muscular, he had broad shoulders, he had big bones, he would kind of tower over people. So he was similar in terms of physique-wise to Sayyidina Umar. But in terms of his mold, in terms of his features, then there were a lot of similarities with Sayyidina Uthman to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another point to mention here is that unlike Sayyidina Umar who was very, very blunt, straightforward, and we touched on this in the previous course, what made Umar harsh, aggressive, and straightforward and blunt. Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu was the total opposite of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Total opposite. He was actually really soft, really mild. And to tell the truth, that kind of was one of the reasons why the insurgents, we'll look at this later, the rebels, took advantage of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu's kindness and his leniency, and they later overthrew and attacked and murdered Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Because he was very soft, very kind-hearted. He would always bend his back for others, but then there's always that danger as well, and we'll read this later on, that sometimes you have to be, bend your back, but be kind, be soft, be lenient. But there are times and occasions where you have to be a bit more blunt and straightforward and strict, like Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Because sometimes, especially nowadays, where we live in a time when if you be soft and if you be lenient and if you kind of bend your back all the time for people, people will trample over you. And this is what happened to Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that when the insurgents, when the rebels started raising questions and objections, if it was, say, Umar radiallahu anhu, everybody knows Umar radiallahu anhu's line, he would have ordered his army and his soldiers to go and chop the heads of these munafiqs off. But Uthman radiallahu anhu, on the other hand, he was very, very lenient. He didn't want a Muslim or anyone's blood to be shed on his account. That's why he was very soft, very lenient. But obviously that then led to the insurgents to then overthrow and eventually murder and martyr Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala. So Sayyidina Uthman, he was very, very soft compared to Umar radiallahu anhu, who was very, very soft. He was very aggressive, very straightforward and very blunt. But one thing I will mention here, and this is one of the reasons why, this is not really mentioned as much, but this is one of the reasons why Umar radiallahu anhu's khilafat was very, very powerful and strong. Because sometimes you need the aggressive person and the mild person to make things work. So Umar radiallahu anhu was aggressive, but Uthman radiallahu anhu was mild. And the two together made the khilafat of Umar radiallahu anhu successful. If you have two aggressive people running the government, then you have problem, because if they're too aggressive both, then they will start fighting with each other, or they will give too much harsh or severe rulings. And if you have two people who are mild, then that doesn't work as well, because then they'll be too mild, too relaxed, too lenient, and people will overtake them. So you need that balance, subhanAllah ta'ala, you need that balance. So Umar radiallahu anhu was the aggressive one, the soft one, the harsh one, the straightforward one, and then you had Uthman radiallahu anhu, the lenient one. So Uthman radiallahu anhu was the one who would give the malish, you just like pat everyone on the back, or don't worry, and Umar radiallahu anhu would be the most strict one and the aggressive one, but the two, subhanAllah, they kind of like work together, and that's one of the reasons why Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu's khilafat and his hukumat and his system or his level of running the country and the Islamic State was very, very successful, not just because of Umar radiallahu anhu himself, but because of the ministers who he had around him. They were mild, and because of that combination, it made the hukumat and it made the Islamic State work. Now moving on to the next part of the slide. The next part of the slide explains about Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu's early part of his life before he converted to Islam. And it's mentioned that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu was from amongst the best of his people. So Uthman radiallahu anhu, when he was growing up, or in particular the tribe he was from the very best tribes of Arabia. And it's mentioned in the course book that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was from the tribe of Banu Umayyah. And there's two words here which I want brothers to remember. One is Banu Umayyah, and then there's another tribe called the Banu Hashim. So Banu Hashim is from Prophet ﷺ's side, like Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala an, Sayyidina Abbas, Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala an. They are from the Banu Hashim. Hassan Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, they are from the Banu Hashim. And then you had another tribe called the Umayyah, Banu Umayyah. I'm sure you must have heard of this in Islamic history, Umayyah dynasty. So that is from Uthman radiallahu anhu. And under this Banu Umayyah, you have Uthman radiallahu anhu, you have Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala an, you have his son Yazid, you have Marwan bin Hakam. These people are from the Banu Umayyah. The reason I'm saying it now is later on when we look at the fitna, the fitan, the turmoil which led to Uthman anhu's martyrdom. There was this issue about Banu Hashim, Banu Umayyah, which some Rafidis or some Shias, if you want to call them, kind of claim that basically there was an issue between them two. Hence, Abdurrahman bin Auf chose Uthman over Hazrat Ali anhu. We'll inshallah touch on this later. But Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he was from the Banu Umayyah, whereas Ali anhu, Prophet ﷺ, they were from the Banu Hashim. But anyway, the Banu Umayyah, they were well respected. As you can see from this slide, they were from the highest status. Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he was very wealthy, modest and eloquent in speech. And if you have a look at the course book, I think if you have a look at the first section of the course book, you'll find that Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he's clapped the Banu Umayyah. His father Affan, if you look at the third paragraph, he explains, died whilst Sayyidina Uthman anhu was young. So as inheritance, as mirath, Sayyidina Uthman anhu received a lot of money. But unlike, say, a young child of nowadays or a young teenager of nowadays, that if he was to receive inheritance from his father's estates or from his father's wealth, in a matter of a couple of years, that son would kind of waste and blow all the money away. Sayyidina Uthman anhu was very intelligent, and he used that money to basically continue with his father's business, and he actually made a lot of money. So unlike, say, other companions like Abu Bakr anhu and Umar anhu, and even to extent Sayyidina Ali anhu, that they didn't have that much money, they didn't have that much wealth in Makkah before their conversion to Islam. Sayyidina Uthman anhu was actually very, very wealthy. He had a lot of money. And again, we'll touch on this later. This is one of the claims the insurgents, or one of the objections the insurgents and the rebels had against Uthman anhu, that they said to Uthman that, oh Uthman, we see you with a lot of money. That means you're stealing from the Baytul Mal. This is one of the objections they made, that you are stealing the public treasury money. So Uthman anhu, as we're going to look at later, will go on to explain to these insurgents and rebels that no, I'm not stealing anything from the Baytul Mal, I'm not taking anything from the treasury, but rather this wealth is my father's wealth. And this is the wealth which I have accumulated over years and years of tijara, over years and years of business. That's the money which I have. I'm not taking anything from the Baytul Mal and from the public treasury. So Sayyidina Uthman, he was one of the richest people. He goes on to explain that, like the other distinguished Khalifs before him, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, he did not prostrate to any idols, or nor did he commit any immoral action. He never drank alcohol and never looked at anyone's aura. So he did not prostrate to any idols, and he never drank alcohol, which, remember, we're talking about before intervention of Islam. That's like a karamat, because everyone was drinking alcohol. Alcohol was like a normal drink. It's like a bottle of water. In those days, alcohol was like a bottle of water. It was like normal. But Sayyidina Uthman anhu, like Abu Bakr anhu and Rasulullah before, he never drank alcohol, nor did he commit any immoral action. So there's never ever been accusation made against Uthman of adultery or any of these kind of things. And the next part goes on to explain, and never did he look at anyone's aura. Now, what does aura mean, brothers and sisters? So aura is an Arabic word which means private parts. So he never looked at anyone's private parts, or not only that, in the books of jurisprudence and fiqh, aura is not just restricted to private parts, brothers and sisters. It's actually an area from the belly button up to and including the knees. So when we say Uthman did not look at anyone's aura, forget looking at their private parts, he didn't even look at their thighs. He didn't look at their thighs, he didn't look at their knees. So that's how much haya and modesty Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and we'll look at this hadith later, one of the virtues of Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he had a lot of haya, a lot of modesty. Like, if anyone had, again we'll touch on this hadith later, that once Prophet ﷺ just had his izar, his bottom just slightly rolled up. So when Sayyidina Uthman anhu came to visit Prophet ﷺ, Prophet ﷺ quickly rolled his izar down. Why? Because Uthman anhu felt embarrassed looking at somebody's, even the bottom part of his leg, looking at that. Sayyidina Uthman anhu felt a bit embarrassed, and he had a bit of haya and modesty. So that's one of the characteristics. Hence, Sayyidina Uthman anhu never ever looked at anyone's aura in his life. He goes on to explain the next paragraph that he was well versed in lineages. In other words, everyone's nasab or family tree, he was well versed in those. So in other words, he obviously knew his own family tree, but other people's family tree, who are their fathers, who are their grandfathers, their great-grandfathers. Sometimes when you speak to the elder people in our community, they'll tell you, they'll give you a big database. It's like they've got a database in their brains of, his son, his father was so-and-so, his grandfather was so-and-so, his great-great-grandfather was so-and-so. So they have a proper database of that person's information, his lineage. It tends to happen like if there's a proposal or a marriage talk, then you probably ask someone, the elder person in the community, or do you know this person's father or this sister's father? And then that person's got like proper database of information that, yes, I know his father, or I know her father, he's like this, he's like that. So similarly, Sayyidina Uthman anhu was well versed, and he had deep knowledge about people's lineages and about their family tree and about their nasab. And this is not something, because some of you may be thinking, well, what's the point? Actually, there's a hadith which can be found in Tirmidhi that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has actually said that ta'allamu bi ansabikum. Learn about your lineage. Learn about your own family tree. And this is something very important, especially to our youngsters nowadays, that our children, our sons, our daughters, they're growing up, and they don't actually will know. Obviously, they probably will know that, okay, who the uncles are, aunties are, and the grandmother, grandfather, that's it. But anyone beyond that, they won't have a clue. So anyone who comes to their house to visit, to them it'll be like, just an ordinary man. To them it's like an ordinary woman. However, it's actually a saying of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you teach your children the lineages. Okay, that this person is coming to your house, he's your uncle, but he's your uncle in this way. Or she's your auntie, or your khala, or your pupi, but in this particular way. So you explain these things to your children. And then you'll see that in that way, there is something then, what we call silatul arham. They, when they're growing up, will then know, okay, she is my so-and-so, he is my so-and-so. And in that way, they will build up relations with their kinship, and they will build that kind of connection. Because if you, as a parent, whilst they're growing up, don't tell them that this is your uncle, or this is your maternal aunt, or this is your khala, or from this side, from that side, then what will happen is that if you don't tell them when they're growing up, they won't know that so-and-so is their relative. They won't know that so-and-so's sister is their khala. And then what will then happen is that, and this is also mentioned in the books of hadith and fiqh, that just say, for example, you have a relative who's actually in need, so it could be financially, it could be some other reasons, and you happen to be their next of kin, but you weren't aware of that, then in the hereafter you'll be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you had a next of kin here, you had a silatul arham here, you had a relative here, why didn't you look after them? So when you look at it, it's also their fault as well, but you're also partly to blame, because you didn't teach your children that he or she is your relative, that he is your uncle, she is your aunt. You didn't explain that. So that's why it's very, very important, like with children when they're growing up, that explaining to them that so-and-so is your relative, and in this way they are your relative. So to explain that to them is very, very beneficial. So as I was going back to Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu, that he was well versed in lineages, also the history of the events of Arabia, about Um Kulthum, the year of the elephants, what happened, he was well aware of it. And the next point, which was very, very important, was that he traveled a lot. I know he was a businessman, but he traveled to various parts of the world, predominantly to Syria and to Ethiopia, Abyssinia. And in that way, when you travel, what happens is that you meet new people. You experience different cultures. And when you meet different types of people or you experience different cultures, what happens is that that builds you up as an imam and as a leader. Because being a leader of a mosque or of a community, you need to be aware that your musallis, your followers, are not just going to be people from your own race or from your own background with the same color. There's going to be different people there from different parts of the world, different languages, different cultures, different customs. So you as an imam need to be aware of that, because you don't want to say something which was something petty, but to them it becomes controversial, and then you kind of bridge a gap and a division within the community. So Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu, subhanAllah, because all this was part of his teaching, so training I should say, of becoming a Khalifa. Because during his time, Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu had to use all his wealth of experience to kind of deal with people. Because remember, during Sayyidina Abu Bakr al-Anhu's time, and also at the initial part of Sayyidina Umar al-Anhu's Khilafat, Islam was still within the compounds of Arabian Peninsula. So there were still Arabs. But during Uthman al-Anhu's time, Islam spread to really to the Asia, to China, to Pakistan, India region. It went all the way down to North Africa. So there were a lot of Ajmis, a lot of non-Arabs who were converting to Islam. So Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu had to use his experience to deal with different people who were converting to Islam, not to scare them away, not to kind of like frighten them, but was kind to them, compassionate to them, so that he called them towards Islam, so they stayed there. So this is all part of Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu's training, that when he was growing up, when he was training, he would go to various parts of the world, visit people, meet people, deal with people, and he then became aware of their cultures and their customs. And he goes on to explain that he was considered in the highest esteem by all the Quraysh. In other words, the Quraysh, the main tribe of Makkah, they all loved and respected Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now moving on to the next part of Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu's life. Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu converted to Islam when he was 34 years old. So basically, Prophet ﷺ received prophethood at the age of 40, and as already explained before, Rasulullah ﷺ was approximately 5 or 6 years older than Uthman al-Anhu. So at the age of 34, i.e. soon after the mission, Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu, he converted to Islam. And if you brothers and sisters remember when we were looking at the course of Abu Bakr al-Anhu, and I talked about Abu Bakr al-Anhu's da'wah. So Abu Bakr al-Anhu, he managed, or he was the one who convinced Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu to convert to Islam. Like he was the one who gave the da'wah. And again, I touched on this before in the Abu Bakr al-Anhu's course, because Abu Bakr had a lot of contacts with people, so he used all his database of contacts to pass the message on to these people. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he also knew a lot of people as well, but sometimes, you know, if you have a trusted ally or an aide, then that person, he could easily tap into his contacts and database, and you then use that person to convey the message rather than you going to the people or the group themselves. It's like, say for example, if Brother Abdul Rahman here, he knows his friend, and it's sometimes a bit difficult for me to go to Abdul Rahman's friends and colleagues and give da'wah, because they may not know me as properly, but because Abdul Rahman, he knows them properly, it's much easier. If Abdul Rahman gave them da'wah, they will be more willing to listen to Abdul Rahman because they know Abdul Rahman, or they've known Abdul Rahman for many, many years, rather than me coming, they haven't seen me, they haven't met me, they don't even know who I am, and me giving them da'wah. So exactly here that Abu Bakr anhu, he had more contacts with Sayyidina Uthman anhu, Abdul Rahman bin Auf anhu, these types of companions, and it was through Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu's da'wah and preaching that Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he converted to Islam. They knew who Prophet ﷺ was. It wasn't like they didn't know him. They knew. But they had more connection with Abu Bakr anhu. So when Abu Bakr anhu came to da'wah, they were more willing to listen and believe and accept what Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu was saying. So as soon as Abu Bakr anhu gave the da'wah, Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he did not hesitate and he converted to Islam. There's also, it's mentioned the books about Sayyidina Uthman anhu, that there was also a story which led to Sayyidina Uthman anhu's conversion to Islam. So he mentions that the story of Uthman anhu's conversion to Islam was that once he was traveling from Syria to Mecca. He was traveling from Syria to Mecca. Obviously he was returning back from a business trip. And what happened was that he then stopped over and he heard the valley calling out. So it was obviously the valley or the surroundings. He heard them calling out that, "O sleepers, get up, for Ahmad has emerged in Mecca." And for brothers and sisters, Ahmad is like another name for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He has many, many names, but the five which are mentioned in the hadith that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam described himself as Muhammad and Mahi and Hashim and Aqib, and another one of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's name is Ahmad. So the valleys of Mecca where Sayyidina Uthman anhu stopped over to take a rest and a break, they were calling out, "O sleepers," i.e. those people who are sleeping, in other words, who are not aware that Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has emerged. The valleys of Mecca were calling out that, "O sleepers, get up, because Ahmad, i.e. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has emerged in Makkah Mukarramah." And I think I may have mentioned this point before, I'm talking about in general, that there will always be an event in life which everyone will go through, and this event or something which will then leave us in a situation where we make a decision. That either whether, number one, we want to change our lives and follow the path of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and follow the deen, or whether we want to continue with our sins and with our evil. And if we choose the first path, brothers and sisters, and we take the path of deen, then subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us tawfiq to be one of the best and the most practicing of believers. But if we take the other path, the path of evil and sin, then literally Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not care or bother about us, and we will end up doing sins and gunas far more worse than what we were committing. And as I said before, that everyone will have this moment in life. Some may get it very early on in their life. Some may get it when they're in their 30s or 40s, where there will be something may happen that you then think about your purpose of life in this world. And I'll give you an example. I'm not saying this is all the time will happen, but I'll give you an example like there may be someone who's been in the path of sins, gunas, drugs, you name it. And then something happens in his life. So it could be like one of his loved ones passes away, his father passes away, his mother passes away, or he had a child and then they tragically passed away or they were brutally killed or murdered. So at that time, that is the moment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him to change. He then starts pondering that, okay, something tragic happened, what do I do? Now if he says, oh, let's not bother, let's carry on with sins and drugs and clubbing and these things, then literally Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not thereafterwards care about it. And that person will end up doing sins, doing things which he never ever thought about doing. And these types of people, you will then see them that later on in their life, they die, they leave this world rejecting Allah. They die as atheists, they die as non-believers. But then if that person, when that thing or calamity befell on him, uses that to change his life, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make him the best of believers. And this is what I want to explain here. And I did touch on this in Sayyidina Umar al-Anhu's course as well. That there was a moment in his life, and that was when he was hitting his brother-in-law, and in the process he also struck his sister Fatima, where Sayyidina Umar al-Anhu had this kind of feeling or this kind of halat, and this state came onto him that what have I done? What am I doing? I'm beating up this woman, this innocent, weak person. What am I doing? And then that made him ponder about his purpose of life and his creation in this world. And similarly, Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu, that when he heard these words, that, oh sleepers, get up, because Ahmad has emerged in Makkah Mukarramah. A miracle had happened, but it made him think and ponder. So when he returned back to Makkah Mukarramah, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr al-Anhu gave him da'wah, preached to him, so what happened was that he accepted the truth and the teachings of Islam. Okay, now moving on to the next slide, brothers. Slide number 2. He's married to Sayyida Ruqayya radiallahu ta'ala anha. Now, as I was explaining at the beginning of the course, that Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu, his title or laqab is known as Dhul-Nurayn, the possessor of 2 lights. And he was called, one of the reasons why he was called that was because he had married 2 of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's daughters. Now it's mentioned that initially the two daughters are Ruqayya and Kulthum. They were married to 2 sons of Abu Lahab. So Abu Lahab was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's uncle. Everyone knows the ayat in the Quran, Tabbat yada abi lahabi wa tab. And he was revealed, why? Because he would always constantly mock Islam, ridicule Islam. He would do things to hurt Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this was at the very beginning of Islam, before the message was being conveyed. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam 2 daughters, Ruqayya and Kulthum, they were married to 2 sons of Abu Lahab. They were Utbah and Utayba. Utbah bin Abi Lahab, Utayba bin Abi Lahab. Now when Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam became public with the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Abu Lahab wanted to hurt Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he was hurting him physically, verbally anyway, by taunting, ridiculing him. But he then wanted to hurt Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam internally. And he thought, okay, the best way I could hurt him was that I tell my sons to divorce his daughters. And I'm sure, obviously, there are many parents here who are in the course that, obviously, if you've given your daughter away to someone in nikah, in marriage, and then that marriage doesn't work out, or the son-in-law, the guy you gave your daughter to, he then divorces her, or he abuses her, or he treats her badly, then naturally you being a father, you're going to feel hurt. You may not show it externally, but in your heart you will definitely pain and hurt you. So exactly here, Abu Lahab, he hated Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He would taunt him, verbally abuse him, but he now wanted to hurt Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam internally. So what he then decided was that he told Utayba, his two sons, that give talaq and divorce Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's two daughters. So they were divorced, they had to now come back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's house. And as any father would be in that situation, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was heartbroken that he gave his daughter away in marriage and in nikah, but after a while it didn't work out. But okay, fair enough if it didn't work out because the two weren't getting along. But when it doesn't work out because the guy's father is basically breaking the marriage, and that's even more painful. So that was the external reasons which were causing the marriage to break, not internal reasons. So therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was heartbroken when his two daughters were ordered to basically be returned back to him, and that the two husbands, Utbah and Utayba, Abu Lahab's two sons, they had divorced Kulthum and they had divorced Ruqayya. Now obviously, this is what happens sometimes, like you go through difficulties in life. But if we do sabr and we are patient, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward us with something better. And I did mention this actually when I was doing the marriage course this time last year, that sometimes brothers, when they do istikhara, or even sisters as well, do istikhara for a marriage proposal, and they get good vibes in the istikhara, everything seems so perfect that this is the person, but then either before the marriage goes ahead, it breaks up. In other words, the groom's family or the bride's family say no, even though engagement, everything's been set, or the nikah date has been set, but before then it doesn't go ahead. Or sometimes it happens that the marriage does go ahead, but after a while it breaks. And sometimes brothers and sisters say, well, Mufti Sahab or Sheikh, we did istikhara, it seems so perfect, why didn't it work out? So basically this is like a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that sometimes you go through difficulties and the marriage doesn't work out, or it doesn't go ahead even though you wanted it to go ahead. But if you do sabr, then what happens is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always give you someone better. And I'll just mention that this is what happened with one of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wife. Her name was Salama, that when her husband Abu Salama was about to pass away, she made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, wallah, like my husband's passing away, can you give me someone more better? So what happened after she finished her waiting period and iddah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then proposed to her. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes you go through difficulties in life, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you with something better. And that was the case here with Ruqayya. Firstly, that she was divorced, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave her someone more better, and that someone, brothers and sisters, was Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And it's mentioned there that subhanAllah, Uthman anhu was very good looking. Ruqayya was also very good looking as well. She was also very pretty and beautiful. And there shouldn't be any surprise there, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so beautiful and handsome, so it is obvious that his daughters are going to be very pretty and very good looking as well. So Uthman anhu was good looking. Sayyida Ruqayya anha was also good looking, and it's mentioned that they were the most best good looking couple in Makkah Mukarramah at that time. So everybody looked up to them. And sometimes when there's the groom is nice and the bride is also beautiful as well. So as a couple they look nice. Also it looks nice on the wedding pictures, but also it looks nice in general as well. So that's how they were. Sayyidina Uthman who was good looking, and also Sayyida Ruqayya anha was also good looking. It's mentioned that they were the best good looking couple anyone had seen in Makkah Mukarramah. Now moving along to the next topic here on the slide is regarding Sayyidina Uthman anhu's migration to Abyssinia and to Ethiopia. Now, I'm not going to explain about the migration because this was a topic which I touched on firstly in Sayyidina Abu Bakr al-Anhu's course, and also I did mention briefly in the Umar al-Anhu's course that persecution was rife when Prophet ﷺ made the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala public and open. So there were various types of persecutions, various types of zulm and oppression which was going on. So therefore, Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu, he decided along with Ruqayya, his wife, to leave Makkah Mukarramah and migrate to Ethiopia. And I explained in the previous courses that they went to Ethiopia, Abyssinia, and after a while they heard that the situation had become better in Makkah. So then they returned back to Makkah, but they heard that actually it was a false rumor and the situation hasn't got better, but it's actually got far more worse than as it was before. So Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu, he migrated with Ruqayya to Ethiopia and to Abyssinia. And basically, as I said, I want to mention the story all over again because we have touched on this before. But there are 3 points regarding Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu's migration to Ethiopia. The first point which Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu learnt, the first thing which Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu learnt from this experience was that one has to be steadfast on his iman, and that going through persecutions and you still are steadfast in your faith is a sign of a mukhlis, is a sign of a sincere believer. That if somebody is a believer, what Uthman al-Anhu understood is that he needs to go through tests and difficulties. And I did touch on this topic before as well. The Prophet ﷺ said, أَشَدُّ النَّاسِ بَلَاءً الْأَنْبِيَاء ثُمَّ الْأَمْثَلْ فَالْأَمْثَلْ, which means that the ones who are more closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they get tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. So the prophets, the Anbiya, were tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. Then those after the Anbiyas and the prophets, in terms of their closeness and their taqwa and their zuhd and their piety, they are tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala next. And those who are far, far away from the deen, then they are hardly tested by Allah. So like in any other organizations, any other companies, to basically show that whether this employee, whether they are sincere in their work, whether they are genuine, whether they believe in the vision of the company or the vision of the organization, they get tested more. In other words, they are told to do more. Why? Because to test whether they are genuine in their work. So similarly here, brothers and sisters, that Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu, the lesson he learned from the expedition to Abyssinia was that those who go through persecutions and difficulties, it's a sign of them being mukhlis, is a sign of them being sincere in their deen and in their faith. And again, these points would help Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu later on in his fight against the insurgents and the difficulty he went through later on in his life. The second point which Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu learned was that risks should be taken by the leader, his family and his relatives. And that the notion that leaders or their family should be away from danger is incorrect. Now what I mean by that is, it happens like where there's like, say, a military coup. You'll see that whenever there's a military coup, whatever, you get the people running riot and taking over the government. Those who are the government ministers, whether it's a president, prime minister, his wife, his children, his sons, his daughters, you'll see that they're the ones who get the best treatment. In other words, nothing happens to them, so they are easily allowed to escape that country go and claim some asylum in another country and they get the best treatment. But it's then the people who are in that country, they're the ones who are then, Allah forbid, are getting massacred. You know, the sisters are then getting raped, the boys and the men are then getting killed. It's the people who then suffer. But you always see that the leaders of that country, they always manage to escape. They'll go somewhere else, they'll claim some asylum, they'll claim this, they'll claim that, and then they live, you know, in peace. Whereas their people, the country they kind of left and exited from, they are getting massacred and butchered left, right, and center. Now, what Sayyidina Uthman understood from his expedition to Abyssinia is that his wife was Ruqayyah. So, Prophet ﷺ didn't say to Uthman that, no, you're going to another country, Abyssinia, so far, far away. We don't know what's it going to be like there in Ethiopia. Do you know what? You could go, but leave my daughter here in Makkah. I want to look after her. But no, Rasulullah ﷺ actually told Ruqayyah that no, you go with your husband. You go with Uthman al-Amr. There wasn't any kind of here like, oh, she's my daughter, she needs to stay in Makkah with me. No. Prophet ﷺ actually encouraged Ruqayyah to go with Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu to Abyssinia. And that then leads to the third point about Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu migrating. He goes to explain that Uthman al-Anhu was the first person to migrate with his family after Lut alayhi salatu wasalam. That Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu, because the people who migrated to Ethiopia, they were actually more like single people, like single men, single women. So they were migrating to Abyssinia. So he goes on to explain that Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu was the first person since Lut alayhi salam, when he migrated with his family from the people when they were doing homosexual acts in that area, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned Lut alayhi salam that the angels are going to come to uproot and destroy your village and your town. So Lut alayhi salam, along with his family and children, had to leave that area and then go somewhere else. So he goes on to explain that since Lut alayhi salam, no other person had migrated or left their hometown or their home city for the sake of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No one until Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu took his wife and the family away from Makkah to Ethiopia. So that's like another virtues or another great act, another great deed of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala. Okay. Moving on to more like his practices, his a'mals and his deeds. So he's mentioned that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, as I was explaining before, he would constantly recite the Holy Quran. And just in general, there's so much sawab and reward in reciting the Holy Quran. Everybody is aware of that very famous hadith of Tirmidhi, that Prophet ﷺ, also of Sahih Muslim as well, that Prophet ﷺ said that every letter of the Holy Quran you read, you get 10 rewards. And Prophet ﷺ then went on to say that La aqulu alif lam mim harfun. Now I'm not saying that alif lam mim is a letter, and by reading or reciting alif lam mim you will get 10 rewards. But alifun harfun, but the letter alif is a harf. So by reading the letter alif you'll get 10 rewards. Wa lamun harfun, and the letter lam is a harf. And by reading the letter lam you'll get another 10 rewards. Wa mimun harfun, and the letter mim is a harf, and by reading that you'll get 10 rewards. So alif lam mim takes you probably 5 seconds to read, less than that. So by reading alif lam mim you get 30 rewards. So just imagine that when you've got 5 minutes, 10 minutes before salah, and you sit down with the Quran in your hand and you read the Holy Quran. Imagine how much hundreds, thousands of thawab and reward you can gain within a 5-10 minute span. So Sayyidina Uthman anhu, going back to his amal and his deeds, he would constantly and he would always recite the Holy Quran. And as I was mentioning right at the beginning, that he recited the entire Quran in one single rakat. So in one single rakat of Qiyamul Layl, of Tahajjud, Sayyidina Uthman would start Allahu Akbar. He will start from Alif Lam Mim and he will finish at Suratul Nas, Min al-Jinnati wan Nas in one single rakat. So he would do one Quran khatam, one Quran completion in one rakat. As we're going to look at later, he was reciting the Holy Quran whilst he was martyred. So whilst he was being martyred, he didn't say for example, plead or beg the insurgents, please don't kill me. We're going to look at later, he was reading the Holy Quran whilst he was executed and beheaded. And the third point, brothers and sisters, is that it's mentioned his Mus'haf, which is an Arabic word to describe the copy of the Quran he had, was worn out because of the amount of time he recited it. In other words, the pages were like worn out. Worn out meaning like you sometimes see in some of the mosque Quran that it gets yellow after a while, because you're constantly turning the pages. So similarly with Sayyidina Uthman anhu's Mus'haf and a copy of the Holy Quran, it literally became worn out and it was tattered because of the amount of times he had recited the Holy Quran, the amount of times he would do Quran khatams and completions of the Holy Quran. Okay, now the next section which we are going to look at here, we want to more like page 4 and 6, is Sayyidina Uthman anhu's time or his relationship with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Makkah and also in Madina Munawwara. In particular, his participation in various battles. Now I'm just going to explain this now. Again, we'll come back to it later because this is one of the objections the rebels and the insurgents they had against Sayyidina Uthman anhu. Now it's mentioned in a hadith that once a person from Misr, or from Egypt, and again we look at this later, that most of the rebels, Abdullah bin Sabah, he was the one who started all this off. His base was in Egypt and Misr. So there was someone from Egypt, they came to Makkah and they met Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And this person was saying to Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu, he was trying to humiliate Hazrat Uthman. He was saying that, do you know Hazrat Uthman, he didn't participate in the Battle of Badr. Hazrat Uthman didn't or fled from the Battle of Uhud, and also Uthman anhu was not even present during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So he was saying that these three things, Battle of Badr, again I touched on this before, it was one of the most significant battles in Islam. Uhud was a battle where the Muslims were defeated. Some Sahabas, they fled. So the objection was that Uthman anhu also fled from the Battle of Uhud, and Hudaybiyah, the treaty with the pagans of Makkah, the objection was that Uthman anhu wasn't there. So this rebel from Egypt was trying to cause some fitna and some turmoil by saying, look, you have Uthman anhu as your leader, but he wasn't there for Badr. He ran away from Uhud, and he wasn't there during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So why is that the case? So obviously we're going to now look at the reasons why Uthman anhu did not attend Badr, the reasons why he wasn't there for the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and Ridwan, and why, brothers and sisters, he kind of moved away from his spot during the Battle of Uhud. And let's begin with Badr. Now, regarding the Battle of Badr, as all of the brothers and sisters are aware that, first and foremost, it was a battle which wasn't pre-planned. That's number one. So it wasn't obligatory for every Sahabi and every companion to go for this battle. And that's why when you look at the numbers of Sahabas who were there, 330, so it wasn't like everyone was there. Only a handful of Sahabas were there for that particular battle. Now the reason why Sayyidina Uthman wasn't there for the Battle of Badr, and as you can see from the slide, that during the Battle of Badr, his wife, Rasulullah's daughter, Ruqayya, she fell ill. She developed measles, or in some of the narrations, it says that she had chickenpox. And obviously those kind of illnesses, especially in those days, were deadly. Even measles nowadays could be deadly if it's not kind of treated within a specific period of time. So Ruqayya, she was sick with measles and she was basically bedridden. Now Sayyidina Uthman, he obviously wanted to go with Rasulullah to intercept that caravan. And I explained this at the very first course, how Battle of Badr started. So there was a caravan of Quraysh which were passing by Madina Munawwara from Syria. So Prophet ﷺ thought that this is a good opportunity for us to intercept this caravan and take all our belongings and our wealth, which we had to unfortunately leave behind in Makkah Mukarramah. So what happened, brothers and sisters, was that Sayyidina Uthman, he really wanted to participate in the Battle of Badr, but Rasulullah ﷺ told Uthman that no, stay behind in Madina and look after my daughter. And he goes on to explain that when her sickness grew, i.e. when Sayyida Ruqayya illness grew and death approached, it says that she was longing to see her father, i.e. the Messenger of Allah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But obviously Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't in Madina Munawwara. He was in the plains of Badr fighting against the enemies. So Uthman he goes on to explain that through his tears he saw his beloved wife Ruqayya pass away, that she breathed her last without her, i.e. Ruqayya, seeing her beloved father Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's mentioned that when Ruqayya was obviously buried, everyone wept and cried at the death of Sayyidah Ruqayya because she was the daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But they were also upset as well because she, Ruqayya, didn't have the opportunity to see her father before she passed away. Sometimes when you hear stories of people passing away when they've been on safar, traveling, and their loved ones don't get to see them before they leave this world. So the people who then attend that person's janazah, it's a bit more sad, you feel a bit more upset that, his brother or his wife or his sister or his mother or father or her husband or her son weren't there at her bedside when she left this world. So this was why everyone around were crying, and all the attendees were crying when they were burying Ruqayya anha. Obviously one day we'll have to leave this world, so there's that natural sadness of somebody leaving this world. But what made it even more sad, and what was even more sorrow and grief for Sayyidina Uthman was that Ruqayya was not able to see her father, was not able to see her loved ones. She had a sister called Zainab in Makkah. She couldn't see her before, or they couldn't see her before she left this world. So he goes on to explain that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came back from Badr, he found out that his daughter Ruqayya had passed away. He went out to Baqi. So Baqi is the graveyard, the very famous graveyard and cemetery of Madina Munawwara, Jannatul Baqi. As mentioned in the hadith, that anyone who is buried there would get the intercession of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he went out to Baqi, he stood over her grave and he prayed, did istighfar for Sayyida Ruqayya radiyallahu ta'ala anha. So Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, he was obviously so sad that his wife had passed away. He was also sad as well on two accounts. One was obviously his beloved wife passing away, but also he couldn't participate in the Battle of Badr because the joy the Muslims had in defeating the mushrikeens of Makkah, and only 300 of them against a strong 1,000 members from the mushriks. So the joy of that victory, Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu did not get. So as a way of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's, a gesture, an act of gratitude to Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu, that we really wanted to go to Badr. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him that, no, I want you to stay back in Madina and look after my daughter. He goes on to explain that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave Uthman radiallahu a share of the booty from the Battle of Badr. So even though he didn't actually physically participate in the Battle of Badr, but he received a share of the booty as a kind of a gesture and to show everyone that the reason why Uthman couldn't go to Badr was because he was looking after my daughter. If my daughter wasn't ill or sick, then yes, definitely he would have been one of the first people there in Badr fighting against the enemies of Islam. But because he was looking after my daughter, that's why I allowed him not to go, but to show, and sometimes it does happen, and it's mentioned also in the hadith as well, that sometimes, brothers and sisters, you get rewards for intentions. The very famous hadith that when you make an intention to do something good, you will get one reward and one thawab. And if you then continue and then carry on with that deed, then you will get 10 rewards. So here Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, he made the intention to go for Badr and to participate and to fight against the enemies. But it wasn't meant to be because his wife was sick and ill. So what happened there was that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu still received a share of the booty based on his intention and his sincere desire to fight in the Battle of Badr. And there's another point which I want to mention here, and this is more for like husbands, wives, vice versa, or even could be fathers, daughters, fathers, sons, mothers, daughters. That what we can learn from here is how important sometimes the rights of the family are. Sometimes it happens that our wives could be ill, our children are very seriously ill, but we give preference to other things over the health of our children. So it could be so that, or there's a program, a conference going on, 2 days conference out of the city. So we rather sometimes would go to those conferences. Don't get me wrong, it's good. But then our children are seriously ill at home. Our wife is seriously ill at home. So we kind of neglect them and we go for those conferences. Sometimes we need to understand and realize what's our priorities. Don't get me wrong, there is a time to go for conferences, but there's also a time to look after our families. So look at this particular incident here where, look, Badr, and everybody knows about the virtues of Badr. One of the distinguishing wars and battles between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu wanting to go, but he didn't go. Why? Because his wife was ill and sick. So from this is a great lesson for us that, there are occasions where, we want to go for a talk, we want to go for a conference, we want to go here, we want to go there. But if that then means that we neglect our wives, our children who may be ill or bimar at that time, and we kind of neglect them and we go for our own benefits, for our own conferences, then that is not actually the teachings of Islam. So as I was saying, brothers, that Uthman anhu, he did go to the Battle of Badr, but he wanted to go, but he didn't go because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him not to. But because he received a share of the booty, it is considered that Sayyidina Uthman anhu participated in the Battle of Badr. Now moving along to the next point here, Uthman anhu in the Battle of Uhud. Now I explained in particular during Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu's course about the Battle of Uhud. Battle of Uhud, brothers and sisters, happened in 3rd Hijri, the 3rd year of migration. And it's one of those battles where the Muslims were defeated. So the Muslims actually lost this particular battle. Now I explained before why and what was the cause behind the Muslims losing this particular battle. And sometimes I said that it's a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that people sometimes lose battles. So people sometimes come 2nd, 3rd in exams, 2nd, 3rd in races, to show that no one can all the time be at the top. And again, the story of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's camel Qaswa. So she was a very big, fast camel. Any camel races, it was a guarantee more or less that she won. But there was one race where she was defeated. And then afterwards, all the Sahabas came to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, "O Prophet of Allah, Qaswas, she would win every single race. She came 2nd. Why?" So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that it is the principle or the usul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that no one gets too elevated, that if they are too elevated and high, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then lower them. So it's a principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Speaking to a parent a few days back, so was saying like my son or my daughter, they used to come 1st in exams, how come they're coming 3rd and 2nd? So I explained to them this story, that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's usul and principle that no one can be 1st in exam, every single exam for the rest of the life. They may have a good patch where a few exams then coming 1st, but that good run will come to an end, and then from one exam they may come 2nd, 3rd, whatever. So it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principle. We shouldn't really get too overly upset that if we were coming 1st in exams, that we then end up 2nd or 3rd. Okay, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's system and nizam of this world. So as I was saying that the Battle of Uhud, the Muslims were defeated. Now, on the slide in front of you, he explains how it all happened, that Khalid bin Walid, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, but at that time he wasn't a Muslim. So the Muslims who were basically around the Mount Uhud, keeping a guard, left their spots, and Khalid bin Walid from the backside of the Mount Uhud came and attacked the Muslims. Now Sayyidina Uthman anhu was one of those, during the melee afterwards, kind of retreating. Like he didn't push forward to continue fighting against the mushrikeens of Makkah. But actually he, Sayyidina Uthman anhu, and some other companions were retreating. So from there the rebels made that objection which I was referring to, that, oh, look at Sayyidina Uthman anhu, you treat him as a Khalifa. But how can he be a Khalifa? Because he was like retreating from the Battle of Uhud. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he revealed a verse about those who retreated from the Battle of Uhud. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَلَّوْا مِنْكُمْ يَوْمَ الْتَقَى الْجَمْعَانِ إِنَّمَا اسْتَزَلَّهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ بَعْدِ مَا كَسَبُوا وَلَقَدْ عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ. Which in a nutshell, brothers and sisters, means that those who retreated from the Battle of Uhud, وَلَقَدْ عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forgiven them. Yeah, Allah has forgiven those who retreated from the Battle of Uhud. And what we're trying to say here is that, look, we human beings, we commit sins, we commit mistakes. But when Allah has forgiven our mistakes, why do you want to still bring that up again? You know, when you were young, you may have done something bad. But you learned from your lesson, you know, you did tawbah, Allah accepted your tawbah, and you've changed. So why then do you want to bring up something which happened 10, 20 years ago? Oh yeah, 10, 20 years ago you did this. Come on, like it's in the past, people make mistakes. So you moved on from there. And this is what we say to those rebels that he made that objection, or Uthman al-Anwi, he fled from the battle of Uhud. What we say is that, look, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forgiven Uthman al-Anwi of that shortcoming of retreating from the battle of Uhud, when Allah clearly has forgiven him, وَلَقَدْ عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُ, why then, brothers and sisters, you then have to kind of raise that thing again, oh, Uthman al-Anwi fled from the battle of Uhud. Why do you have to raise it for? There's no need for you to raise it. And I did touch on this hadith in our previous course, Sayyidina Umar al-Anhu's course, that this hadith can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that whosoever, brothers and sisters, criticizes someone for a sin which he had done, but Allah has accepted his tawbah and repentance of that sin, whosoever criticizes someone for that, the hadith explains that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make that person who is criticizing commit that sin before he leaves this world. So if someone committed zina and adultery and you're criticizing him, even though Allah has done his tawbah and accepted his tawbah, we're still criticizing, oh yeah, he did this with that woman and with that woman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the all-powerful, because for Allah, for anything to happen, there's only one command, kun fayakun. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you commit zina, will make you commit adultery. Why? Because you were ridiculing and criticizing someone for a sin which he did. Fair enough, he committed a sin, but he did tawbah and he repented from him. So you then criticize him for that, Allah will make you commit that sin before you leave this world. So what I'm trying to explain here, brothers, is that fair enough, Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu did retreat from the battlefield, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done accepted his tawbah. So when his tawbah was done, why on earth are you still raising that issue, or he fled from the battlefield? So that was the second objection the rebels had, and the second answer which obviously Sayyidina Ibn Umar al-Anhu gives from the hadith. The third issue the rebels had, brothers and sisters, is about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Now, again, I touched on this before during Sayyidina Abu Bakr al-Anhu's course, but I'll re-mention it again in a bit more detail because this is more got to do with Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu. Now, during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah happened in 6th Hijri, and the basis of that was, brothers and sisters, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he saw a dream. And in his dream, he saw that he, along with the companions, were performing Umrah around the Baytullah. And remember, brothers and sisters, that whatever dream Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sees, that's going to happen. It's always haq, it's always true. Whereas our dreams, well, let's not get into it, but we can't say for sure it's going to come into existence or fruition. But for Prophet ﷺ, or for any prophets and anbiyas, any dreams they see, it's haq, it's true. It will come out. So when Prophet ﷺ saw that he and the companions were performing Umrah, and Prophet ﷺ then related that dream to the companions were so happy that, oh yes, that means we are going to return back to Makkah. I need to realize the companions' desires here, because it's been 6 years since they were forced to leave or expelled from Makkah. So 6 years they haven't seen Makkah Mukarramah. You can imagine, like, just say for argument's sake that you were brought up in Birmingham but for work-related issues, you had to move to London, Manchester, and you haven't returned back to Birmingham for 6 years. So all your friends, families, where you lived before, all those things. So you can imagine that the Sahabas were so excited that we're going to return back to Mecca. We could see our old families, our old friends. We could see the Baytullah. We could see the house of Allah. The house they would see every single day. But for 6 years they were deprived in seeing it because they were expelled by the mushriks of Mecca. Why? Because they had chosen a new faith contrary to theirs. So they were all happy to go back to Mecca. So what happened, brothers, that 1400 Sahabas, they made their way towards Makkah Mukarramah. They stopped over at a place called Hudaybiyah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam initially wanted to send Umar radiallahu ta'ala an to go and communicate to the leaders of Makkah that, look, guys, we are not here to basically fight or wage war against you. We are here just to do Umrah, and then afterwards we leave. Look, we haven't even bought any weapons, anything like that. We just got a few which is covered. But besides that, we have no weapons, no artillery, no armory. We just want to come, perform Umrah, and then leave. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to send Umar radiallahu anhu. So Umar radiallahu anhu declined the offer, and he said, "Thou Prophet of Allah, if I go there, then they still have a hunch against me because I left them and I beated some of them up when I was leaving Makkah to Madina Munawwara. They may do a revenge attack against me. So I suggest that you send somebody else, somebody from within your family." So therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu because he was from his family. He was his son-in-law. So Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, he went to Makkah. Now when he went to Makkah, brothers and sisters, he communicated to the leaders that, look, we as Muslims are here to perform Umrah and that's it. Now the leaders of Makkah, brothers and sisters, told Uthman radiallahu anhu that, okay, you can perform Umrah, but not Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the 1400 companions. That you could do it yourself, yeah, we allow you to do it, but we don't want Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and your other companions to do it. And from this, brothers, we can derive the answer which Sayyidina Uthman gives. He says, no. Either we all do it together, or I'm not going to do it. Either we all do it together, or the other option is, I'm not going to do it, I'm going to go. And as I was saying, that this shows, first and foremost, Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu's closeness to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he didn't want to do something without Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's number one. And the second point, brothers and sisters, which we can derive here, tells us the importance about unity, about ittihad. Because look, if Uthman radiallahu anhu wanted, I'm sure he could have just done the Umrah by himself. He was just right there. He didn't take it, especially in those days where there weren't that many people. So he could have easily done the Umrah in half an hour or so, and he could have left. But because of unity and ittihad, he gave up his own, what we call, personal desires and ambitions for the sake of the majority. Subhanallah. And this is what we're going to look at later on when people were saying to Uthman radiallahu anhu, "Oh Uthman, come on, wipe out these rebels, kill them. You've got big armies in Madina, send them out to Egypt and Basra and Kufa and wipe away these rebels and these mischief makers." But Uthman radiallahu anhu, because of the importance of ittihad and unity amongst the Muslims, said no. Because I'm sure he could have, but then that would then give the impression that Uthman radiallahu anhu is killing his own people. Because the people, the outside world, are not going to look at, oh, these people are mischief makers. They're just looking at, well, he's a Muslim. The outside people don't know that these people are munafiqs. They just think, oh, well, he's got a beard and he looks a Muslim. He's killing his own people. So more out of ittihad and closeness and unity, Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, he never ever wanted anyone's blood to be shed on his account, and number two, he never ever wanted to damage the ittihad. He never ever wanted any spears or anything poking at the importance of ittihad and closeness of the Muslim Jama'ah and the Muslim Ummah. So that's why Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu said to the mushrikeen, the pagans of Makkah, you know what, your offer I'm not going to take. Either I do it with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or I'm going to leave. Now what then happened was some rumors spread. Rumors spread, and obviously we know rumors, they could spread, especially bad rumors, they tend to spread very quickly compared to good things. So you always hear about the bad thing first and then the good thing comes afterwards. So in a masjid or in a community, you'll always hear the bad things first, or the mosque is like this, the mosque is like that, the Imam Sahib is like this and the Imam Sahib is like that. But the good things the community people are doing, the good things of the masajid, the good things of the Imam, the connection signal for that comes a bit later on around. 10 years later you find something good about the Imam. So as I was saying, the rumors spread. What spread? Spread that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu had been martyred in Makkah. That the mushrikeens of Makkah basically killed Uthman radiallahu anhu. So this led to something known in the books of history, brothers and sisters, as Bay'atul Ridwan, the pledge of Ridwan. And what does Ridwan mean? Ridwan is actually a name of a tree. And it was under this tree that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did this pledge of allegiance. And he called every single companion, and like you may do bay'ah with a sheikh, he called every single companion, they gave their hands to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they held Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hands, and basically they promised Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we are going to fight till death for revenge for Uthman radiallahu anhu's killing. And why this pledge was taken? It was taken because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was deeply upset that, look, Uthman radiallahu anhu, he just went to pass a message. And there's this old age usul principle, and they also have this as well, don't shoot the messenger. What does that mean? It means that the messenger who goes to convey the message, you don't kill him, you let him off. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was deeply upset that they killed Uthman radiallahu anhu, and he was a messenger. He didn't go there to fight, he just went there to convey a message and they killed him. But the problem was that the Muslims, they didn't have any weapons with them, very little. They had a few daggers and knives and that's it. That's not going to be enough to wipe away the Quraysh and the pagans of Makkah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't want any Sahabi, any companion to kind of shirk from his responsibility. So he took a pledge of allegiance that, you know what, we're going to march into Makkah, we are going to fight and fight and fight until either they die or we die. So that was the pledge of allegiance known as the Bay'atul Ridwan, the Bay'ah which took place, and the Bay'ah and the pledge was taken solemnly on death. And we're going to go into Makkah, even though we have nothing on us, it doesn't matter, we'll just use our knuckles, we'll use our hands, we'll use stones, bricks, sticks, whatever we find. We're going to use that to basically take revenge for Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu's death. Now later on, it goes on to explain, and it's also in the, you find in the course book and also in the presentation in front of you, that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu wasn't there. So what did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? He got his right hand and he said to everyone, this is the hand of Uthman. And then he put it onto his left hand and said that this is the bay'ah of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So the claim made by these insurgents that Uthman radiallahu anhu wasn't there in Hudaybiyah, wasn't there for the pledge. Yes, he wasn't there for the pledge. Well, he wasn't there because of a valid reason. And what was the valid reason, brothers and sisters? he went to convey a message to the mushrikeen of Makkah. That's one. But also number two, brothers, that he wasn't there again for a valid reason, and that was that rumors spread that he had been killed, and the pledge took place because of this rumor. And then how lucky Sayyidina Uthman was that Rasulullah's right hand was assumed to be his hand, and then he touched the hand of Rasulullah's left hand, and that became the pledge of allegiance. So these were the three kind of objections made by the rebels about Uthman and the three responses. Obviously, Sayyidina Uthman, he was always there with Prophet ﷺ in the other major battles like Khaybar and so on, Khandaq, he was there. He was also there for another famous battle known as the Battle of Tabuk, 9 Hijri. Why was this battle famous? Battle famous because in this battle, or this battle showed Sayyidina Uthman anhu's generosity, his sahawat. And basically what happened, brothers and sisters, that it was 9 Hijri, and there was Hercules or Heraclius, who basically made an intention to basically wage war against the Arabs, against the people of Arabia, to wage war against them. So it was a very, very hot summer. The Muslims, because of various earlier battles, there was very little in the reserves. What I mean by that was that there were very little camels, horses, there were very little armors, there were very little weapons, artilleries. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, subhanallah, he made an announcement, and the announcement was that who will equip the army, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive it. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made an announcement that who is going to be that lucky person who will equip the army, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive that person. So Uthman anhu, he stood up and he said, I will. And there's two types of hadiths. The hadith here says that Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he provided the army with 940 camels, 60 horses, and 10,000 dinars. They were all by Uthman. Not like he went and did some other fundraising and then he got the money. No, he provided all that himself. 940 camels, 60 horses, 10,000 dinars. Everybody. Then he goes on to explain in another narration, brothers and sisters, that Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he stood up and he said that, O Prophet of Allah, I will give 100 camels bi ahlasiha wa aqtabiha, laden with food. Then Rasulullah made another announcement. He said, oh, who's going to help prepare the battle of Tabuk, the army for the battle of Tabuk? Uthman anhu then stood and he then said that I will provide 200 camels laden with food. And then Prophet ﷺ made a third request that who is going to help prepare the army for the battle of Tabuk? And again, Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he said that I will provide 300 camels laden with food. Thereafterwards, Rasulullah ﷺ said these words which is mentioned there. Rasulullah ﷺ said, "Ma darra Uthmanu ma amila ba'da al-yawm marratayn." That no deed can harm Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu after today. Now, in other words, Uthman radiyallahu anhu could do whatever he wants after today. No deed can harm him. Obviously, we're not going to say out of respect and adab that if he committed a sin, but just say if a shortcoming happened from Uthman anhu, then nothing can affect him after today. So if Sayyidina Uthman anhu because we human beings, brothers and sisters, end of the day, so if Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu did something later on in his life, a shortcoming, a khata, a mistake, then it can't harm him. In other words, that automatically forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why, brothers and sisters? Because of his act of generosity during the Battle of Tabuk. So what I'm trying to explain here is that this shows how, subhanAllah, Sakhi, how generous Hazrat Uthman al-Anhu was, that basically he was like giving so much camels, so many things away in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as you can see from the point at the top, that the announcement or the i'lan made by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was that those who will support or provide for the Battle of Tabuk, Allah will forgive them. So that's one of the greatest achievements, one of the great characteristics of Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu. That's why he's one of the Ashra Mubashara, one of those guaranteed Jannah and Paradise, brothers and sisters. Why? Because he did so much. Because of that reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave him. Okay, inshallah, we'll give a break for 10 minutes or so, inshallah. So we'll continue around 11:50. So may Allah give tawfiq to you at the most. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihi al-kareem. Amma ba'd. Inshallah, the second session of the course regarding Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, which will start now and finish just before Salatul Dhuhr. So alhamdulillah, in the first part of the course we were looking at more regarding Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu's life, his lineage, his first marriage to Sayyida Ruqayyah radiyallahu ta'ala anha, how that sadly ended, and also some objections made by the rebels, by the insurgents, as to why Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu did not participate in the Battle of Badr, why did he flee from the Battle of Uhud, and also why wasn't he there for the Hudaybiyah Treaty, why wasn't he there for Bay'at al-Ridwan. So alhamdulillah, the answers for each one of them were given. Now moving on to the next slide here, slide number 4. Slide number 4 begins with the next part of Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu's life, and that is regarding his marriage to Sayyida Kulthum radiyallahu ta'ala anha. As I was explaining, brothers and sisters, that he was initially married to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's second daughter Ruqayyah, but when she passed away, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then decided to give his other daughter, Kulthum, to the nikah and to the marriage of Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And it's mentioned in the hadith of Mustadrak al-Hakim that Umar radiyallahu anhu came to Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu and asked Uthman, do you want to marry my daughter Hafsa? And we touched on this in the previous course of Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, that Hafsa radiyallahu anha, her husband, passed away during the Battle of Uhud. So Hafsa was actually a widow. So Umar radiyallahu anhu firstly offered Hafsa to Uthman radiyallahu anhu. Uthman radiyallahu anhu declined, and then he offered his daughter to Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And then we looked at the hadith that Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu did not actually say anything. Why? Because he heard Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanting to marry Hafsa radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Now in this variation, or in this particular narration, which can be found in Mustadrak al-Hakim, he explains that he offered, Umar offered Hafsa to Uthman because Uthman heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanting to marry her, so he kept quiet. So Umar who approached Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and explained the story to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet of Allah, I asked Uthman, do you want to marry my daughter? And he kept quiet. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said the following words: how about I give you a better idea? And that is that I will marry Hafsa, so someone more better than Uthman, i.e. I will marry Hafsa radiallahu ta'ala anha, and Uthman can marry someone more better than Hafsa. So I, someone better than Uthman, will marry your daughter, i.e. Hafsa, and Uthman will marry someone more better than your daughter. And what was Prophet ﷺ indicating to you? That I will marry Hafsa because I'm more better than Uthman. But Uthman will marry someone more better than Hafsa. In other words, Uthman will marry my other daughter, Kulthum, and Kulthum, being the daughter of Rasulullah ﷺ, will be far more better than the daughter of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. In another hadith which can be found in Sunan ibn Majah, he explains that Abu Hurairah narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood at the door of the mosque and he said, O Uthman, Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam has told me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to marry Kulthum for a dowry similar to that of Ruqayyah and to treat her with similar kindness. So in the second hadith of Ibn Majah, that's giving the impression that actually this marriage or this nikah of Uthman to Kulthum wasn't actually decided by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heavens ordered and commanded Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that hand over or give your daughter Kulthum to Sayyiduna Uthman with the same dowry which you gave to Ruqayyah, and also similarly be kind and treat Kulthum the same way you treated Sayyida Ruqayyah radiallahu ta'ala anha. Now continuing with the marriage of Uthman to Kulthum and later on the death of Kulthum radiallahu ta'ala anha, it's mentioned that Kulthum radiallahu ta'ala anha stayed in Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu's marriage until Sha'ban 9 Hijri. So 9th Hijri Sha'ban, where Kulthum radiallahu ta'ala anha passed away. And in the second paragraph goes on to explain that the following Sahabas, Sayyidina Ali, Fadl ibn Abbas, Usama bin Zayd, they went down in her grave with Abu Talha, and that the ones who bathed or washed Kulthum radiallahu ta'ala anha's body was Asma bint Umays and Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib. So these two female Sahabis, Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib and Asma bint Umays, they bathed Kulthum radiallahu ta'ala anha's body, and basically the following Sahabas went into her grave to receive her body. Obviously, nowadays, when you bury someone, say in Handsworth Cemetery, whatever, they normally have the machine which kind of they lower the coffin into the grave. Obviously, those they didn't have these kind of machines. So what would happen is that people would actually go inside the grave. So if you dig the grave, people had to go inside and then obviously receive the body and then lower the body into the grave. So this is what happened with Kulthum when she passed away, that the following companions mentioned there in the slide, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, Fadl bin Abbas being one, they actually went into the grave and they received the body of Kulthum, and then they put or placed the body there. And it goes on to explain the next part of the paragraph that Uthman anhu, he was very, very upset, deeply upset that his second wife, so he already married one of Rasulullah's daughters, she passed away, but then he married another of his daughters. So she also passed away as well. So Uthman was very deeply upset that two of his wives have already passed away, that Rasulullah saw the signs of grief and loss on his face, that Rasulullah said to Uthman, that Uthman, if I had a third daughter, I would have given her to you. So that's like the rank Uthman had, the status, the love, the affection, the closeness Uthman had to Rasulullah that Rasulullah was so pleased with Uthman that Rasulullah was saying, look, if I had a third daughter, I would have given her to you. And actually there's a lot of wisdom behind that, because only say, for example, a father-in-law, like say your wife's father or your wife's mother, would only make that remark that if I had another daughter, I would have given her to you, if they are pleased with the son-in-law. If the son-in-law is of no good, or he's always being harsh and aggressive and nasty to the daughter, no parents of the daughter would say, if something happened to the daughter, if the daughter passed away, no parents would say to the son-in-law that, oh, if I had another daughter, I would have given her to you. But for Rasulullah to say that if I had a third daughter, I would have given her to you, actually tells us how much love and how pleased and how happy Rasulullah was with Sayyiduna Uthman in the way he treated his daughters, the way he treated Ruqayya firstly, and thereafterwards the way he treated Kulthum radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Now moving on to the next part of Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu's life. This is more about some contributions Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu made to the people of Madina Munawwara. And also later on we're going to be looking at some virtues of Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu made many contributions during his life in Madina Munawwara for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and for the Muslim Ummah. And the three economic contribution Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu made, don't get me wrong, many Sahabas made many contributions, made so much effort, put their life and soul for the sake of Islam. But in terms of the economic side, Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu managed to a certain extent outcompete the other Sahabas. Why, brothers and sisters? Because, as I was explaining right at the beginning, that Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu was blessed with abundance of wealth, in particular from the inheritance of his late father. So instead of wasting and blowing that money away, Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu used that money for the service and for the khidmah of deen. Now, a few of these contributions here. Number one, the well of Bi'r Ruma. Very famous hadith which can be found in Tirmidhi and also the other books of hadith as well. That when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslims, when they migrated to Madina Munawwara, the well or the water of Madina Munawwara was very bitter. Actually, when the Muslims came to Madina, as mentioned in the hadith of Bukhari, that Madina Munawwara, in terms of its climate, wasn't a very good place to migrate to. Many of the Sahabas, like Bilal radiyallahu anhu, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, fell seriously ill when they arrived in Madina Munawwara. The climate wasn't good, and it was one of those plague-infected areas. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah, can you remove the plague and the difficulties and the diseases of Medina and transfer it to a place called Juhfa. And Juhfa, brothers and sisters, is a place in Syria where the Jews lived. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made that particular dua. So thereafterwards, Madina Munawwara became a very beautiful place, and there weren't any problems, any more plagues, any more infections or diseases in Madina Munawwara. So as I was saying, that when the Sahabas migrated to Madina Munawwara, the water in Madina Munawwara was very bitter and sour. There was only one well in Madina Munawwara which gave out sweet, beautiful water. And that was the water, brothers and sisters, of the well of Ruma, which was owned by a Jew. So a Jewish person, a Jew, he owned the well of Ruma. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that which companion would buy this well of Ruma from this Jew in exchange for a well in Jannah and Paradise. Subhanallah. So Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he went out and he bought that well from that Jew, and he then, not just for himself, he then gave it as waqf. Waqf meaning that he then donated it to the Muslims of Madina Munawwara. So all the Muslims of Madina Munawwara, subhanAllah, were then able to drink from the sweet water from the well of Ruma. It wasn't like Uthman bought it and then kept it for himself and then he gave it to whoever he wanted to. No, he then donated it, gave that well away as waqf to the people of Madina Munawwara so that they can drink from the sweet waters rather than the sour and the bitter water of Madina Munawwara. So that was the first economic contribution made by Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The second contribution made by Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu was the expansion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mosque. Now when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated to Madina Munawwara, the first thing he did was to build a mosque. So there were two orphans. He bought some land from them and he turned that, or on top of that land, he made a mosque. But obviously over the years, because of the number of Muslims were increasing, there was a need to expand Masjid al-Nabawi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that near Masjid al-Nabawi, there was a piece of land there. So Prophet ﷺ said that who will buy this land and expand Masjid al-Nabawi ﷺ in exchange for a piece of land in Jannah and Paradise. So Sayyidina Uthman anhu stood up, he went and he purchased the land, and again he gave it, he donated it to the mosque, donated it to Rasulullah ﷺ, donated it for the cause of Masjid al-Nabawi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that the masjid can be expanded up to that land. And from these two stories thus far, what we can understand here is someone making an intention and then someone, say for example, carrying out that intention. When it comes to, I'm sure when it comes to fundraising events you have in the masjid, a lot of people make promises and intentions that yes, we will donate this much and that much. But then when the time comes to donate that amount, people then backtrack and say, okay, well, I can't give all that, I'll give half, I'll give a quarter, I'll give a third. And the next thing you know that some of them don't even pay all of it. But look at Sayyidina Uthman anhu, that when the announcement and the i'lan was made, he actually stood up, went and he brought it, and then he donated. It wasn't like, oh Prophet of Allah, okay, I'll do it, but then not even think about purchasing the land, not even think about purchasing the well of Ruma. He actually stopped the talk, if that makes sense, and actually showed it through actions. And this is what the Ummah, brothers and sisters, need. We don't need people anymore to like give all the fancy talks, yes, yeah, I'll help you, and I'll do this for you, I'll do that for you. We want people to show through actions. The Ummah at this moment in time is crying out for people to help each other, to do the actions. And we're not in need of any more fancy talks anymore that, oh yes, yeah, we'll help you when you're in need. And that unfortunately is the case nowadays with the Ummah, that many people make promises that we'll do this, we'll do that. But very few of these promises is coming to fruition. And this is where the Ummah is in such a very, very bad state, that people making all these claims that we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll help the Muslim Ummah. You know, the Muslim Ummah are being tortured, going through various persecutions. So people are making the claims and, oh, we'll do this, we'll help. But when it comes to financially supporting, when it comes to helping our brothers and sisters in the other parts of the world, then the action is very, very little. So this is what I want to explain here about Sayyidina Uthman anhu, that the announcement was made. He didn't just make the intention, he didn't just promise Prophet ﷺ, I'll buy the land or I'll buy the well for you. He actually went out and he did it. So these are two great economic contributions of Sayyidina Uthman anhu. If we move on, obviously we just looked at it now, the Battle of Tabuk and the generosity of Uthman. That when the Battle of Tabuk came about and the announcements Rasulullah ﷺ made that who is going to prepare the army to fight against Hercules in Tabuk. So Rasulullah ﷺ made this announcement. So Sayyidina Uthman anhu was the first one to put his hand up, and he then provided Rasulullah ﷺ with 100 camels, 200 camels, 300 camels, according to one narration, laden with food, with armory, everything, you name it. That's an example of Sayyidina Uthman anhu, not just saying it, but saying and then backing it up his words by action and then providing those things. Now we're going to move on to the next topic here, brothers and sisters. And I'm going to mention some virtues of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And the first virtues, which is there in front of you on the slide, is once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave Sayyidina Uthman anhu glad tidings of Jannah and paradise in return for a calamity that will befall him. Now I'll just go over the hadith. These hadiths can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi. That is narrated by Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he explains that once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he entered a garden. And he told Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu ta'ala anhu to be the guard. In other words, to stand outside the door. And basically, if anybody wants to enter, then firstly to seek permission from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that whether they could enter, and after they get permission, then they can enter. So the words of the hadith, brothers and sisters, explains that the first person to knock on the door and seek permission was Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, who was the guard, by the way, he asked Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, O Prophet of Allah, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wants to enter. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said these words to him, إِذَنْ لَهُ وَبَشِّرْهُ بِالْجَنَّةِ. That give Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu permission and give him glad tidings, وَبَشِّرْهُ بِالْجَنَّةِ. Give him glad tidings of Jannah and paradise. Thereafterwards, Sayyidina Umar anhu knocked on the door. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari then passed the message on to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that Umar anhu wants to enter. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, okay, give permission to Umar anhu wa bashirhu bil Jannah, and also give him glad tidings of Jannah and paradise. So Umar anhu entered. And the third person to then knock on the door was Sayyidina Uthman anhu. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari then asked Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that Uthman anhu is here, he wants to enter. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said these words, Iftah lahu, open the door for him, give him permission to enter. وَبَشِّرْهُ بِالْجَنَّةِ عَلَى بَلْوَى تُصِيبُهُ. And give him glad tidings of Jannah for a calamity that will befall him. In other words, he will enter Jannah and paradise, but before usse pehle there would be a calamity. He will go through a turmoil, he will go through a fitna, he will go through a difficulty, and then after he goes through the difficulty and turmoil, then grant him Jannah and paradise. SubhanAllah. And this obviously we will look at this particular hadith later when we are looking at the fitans and the turmoils which Sayyidina Uthman went through before his martyrdom. So that's the first virtue of Sayyidina Uthman. He's guaranteed Jannati, he's guaranteed a dweller of Jannah and paradise. Number 2. The second hadith about his virtues, again brothers and sisters, this hadith can be found in Tirmidhi, that once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyiduna Abu Bakr, Sayyiduna Umar, and also Sayyiduna Uthman were on Mount Uhud. So they were sitting on Mount Uhud. When all of a sudden Mount Uhud started shaking, فَتَحَرَّكَتِ الْجَبَلِ. The mountain started shaking, started moving. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then tapped his feet onto the mountain and said, "Uthbut," like be quiet, be calm, be quiet, or be still, Uhud, because on top of you there is a prophet, i.e. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Nabi, or Siddiq, there is a truthful one, referring to Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an, wa shahidan, and there are 2 martyrs, indicating towards number 1, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, that his death is going to be a death of a martyr, and we touched on this in the previous course, Abu Lu'lu, the Persian slave, killing and martyring Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, and number 2, that the death of Uthman radiallahu anhu is going to be a death of a martyr, that he's also going to be a shaheed, quite clearly saying that what the insurgents were doing, the rebels were doing, they were totally, without any doubt, brothers and sisters, they were on the false and the batil. What they were planning, they were all on the batil. What they were doing was all on the false, and that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, his martyrdom, like his death, was a death of a martyr. He was the oppressed, he was the Muslim. And number 3, brothers and sisters, the third virtue of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu is about his modesty, which I was referring to before. And I mentioned that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu never ever saw the aura or the private parts, the nakedness of any man or of a woman. And the hadith which I want to refer to is a hadith which can be found in Sahih Muslim, similar to the first hadith of this section, that once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's mentioned mustaji'an fi baytihi, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was lying down at home, kashifan an fakhizayhi aw saqayhi, that his shins were exposed. So basically, as I was referring to early on in the talk, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was lying down on his bed at home, and his izar, his bottoms, they were rolled up, and his shins were exposed. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was lying down, and it happens, and obviously when we go to sleep, we will take off our jubba, we will take off our Islamic attire, and obviously the clothing will wear t-shirts, bottoms. It's going to be relaxed. There may be like some parts of our body slightly exposed. There's nothing wrong with it because it's like bedtime. It's time to rest. So similarly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was sleeping, and some parts of his shins were exposed. So what then happened, brothers and sisters, was Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, came into his house. فَأَذِنَ لَهُ وَهُوَ عَلَى تِلْكَ الْحَالِ. That Rasulullah gave him permission, but he was in that very same state. In other words, he did not roll down his izar, he left it as it is, rolled up. Then Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu came, again Rasulullah remained the same. Then Uthman radiallahu anhu knocked on the door, Rasulullah gave permission, and as soon as Rasulullah gave permission, was sawwa thiyabahu. Rasulullah then straightened his clothes. The izar, the bottoms which were rolled up to his knees, showing his shins. As soon as Sayyidina Uthman came, Rasulullah straightened his izar and he made it normal. Now after Uthman left, Sayyidah Aisha she asked Rasulullah that when Abu Bakr came, you left your clothes as it is. When Umar came, you left your clothes as it is. But when Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu came, you then straightened your clothes. Why was that? What was the reason for that? Why was that the case? So the hadith goes on to explain, فَقَالْ أَلَا أَسْتَحْيِي. Rasulullah saying this, أَلَا أَسْتَحْيِي مِنْ رَجُلٍ تَسْتَحْيِي مِنْهُ الْمَلَائِكَةِ. Which means that shall I not show haya and modesty of that person who the angels show modesty and haya of. In other words, that person who the angels show modesty to, the angels have haya of, shall I not show that same modesty and haya which the angels show haya and modesty of? And I was explaining before, brothers and sisters, that as Uthman anhu had a lot of shame, lot of haya, lot of what we call modesty. Now don't get me wrong, it's not a modesty of shyness that which prevented him from speaking the haqq and the truth. Because sometimes it happens, people are so shy that when haqq needs to be said, they don't say it. So even though something's haram going on, they say, oh well, I'm shy, I can't say that. No, it wasn't that kind of haya, because that's not actually a praiseworthy haya to have. Because haya means that, okay, you don't want to do something wrong or haram. You know, if someone's aura is visible, you don't want to look at it. That is called haya. But haya doesn't mean that where haqq needs to be said, when something truthful needs to be spoken, when the haqq needs to be communicated to someone, that you kind of shy away and say, oh well, no, I can't say that because I'm too shy. No, you need to speak the truth, you need to speak the haqq. So Uthman did not shy away from the truth, brothers and sisters. He wasn't modest away from the truth. But when he came to other things, in particular staying away from evil and obscene and immoral things, Sayyidina Uthman was far, far away from it. So these are, brothers and sisters, three virtues of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala. Now moving along to the next paragraph here. Some ahadith about the turmoil and the fitna of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And what I want to explain here, brothers and sisters, is that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu was told by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from before that there would be a fitna or a turmoil which would be a cause for his death and for his martyrdom. Now inshallah, it's coming up later on in the slide about the fitna, how it happened, why did Prophet ﷺ mention the fitnas and the turmoil. But I've just mentioned three hadiths here to basically show that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu was 100% without any doubts, brothers and sisters, was an innocent person, was a Muslim, was the oppressed person, and the rebels and the insurgents, they were totally at fault, they were totally, how shall I say, in the wrong when it came to the martyrdom of Sayyiduna Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And there's a couple of hadiths here. If we have a look at the first hadith. So the first hadith is narrated by Murrah bin Ka'b radiallahu anhu. That it's mentioned that once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking about fitan, وَذَكَرَ الْفِتَنَةِ فَقَرَّبَ بِهَا. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, brothers and sisters, explained that this fitan and this turmoil is very, very soon and is very, very close. That the fitna of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu is very close and is very nearby. Then what happened, if we just have a listen of the words, فَمَرَّ رَجُلٌ مُقَنَّعٌ فِي ثَوْبٍ. So at that moment in time, whilst Prophet ﷺ was delivering a sermon and a bayan, a lecture, that of fitna, turmoil is very close, a man walked by, مُقَنَّعٌ فِي ثَوْبٍ, whose head was covered in a cloak. Muqanna from the word qina is like a cloak. So Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, whose head was covered in a cloak. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said, هَذَا يَوْمَئِذٍ عَلَى الْهُدَى, that this person would be on guidance on that day. On that day when the fitan and the mischief and the insurgents would be taking over Madina Munawwara and causing problems and turmoil, this man, this person will be on guidance and will be on the haqq. And the hadith goes on to explain, فَإِذَا هُوَ Uthman bin Affan, that the person who was wearing that cloak, who was hooded in that cloak, was Sayyiduna Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So this is a clear hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that fitan will happen, turmoils and mischiefs will happen, but this man, the man who was wearing the cloak that day when he passed by the gathering, he, Uthman radiallahu anhu, will be on huda, will be on guidance, will be on the haqq. To clearly indicate, brothers and sisters, that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu was oppressed, he was a mazloom, and he had nothing to do with any of the insurgents and what they were going on. Obviously, in another hadith he explained, the first hadith, the man who is covering his head will be killed on that day. يُقْتَلُ مَذْلُومًا. Mentioned another hadith of Tirmidhi, indicating that Sayyidina Uthman anhu, he was on the haqq. And then the third hadith, indicating towards the turmoil, again, brothers and sisters, again a hadith of Sayyid Muslim, also it can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Sayyidina Uthman anhu, that فَإِنْ أَرَادُوكَ عَلَى خَلْعِهِ, that time will come when they, أَرَادُوكَ, will intend عَلَى خَلْعِهِ, to remove your qamis. A time will come when they, the munafiqeens and the hypocrites, will want to remove your shirt. Now here, brothers and sisters, shirt doesn't mean in its literal sense that they want to take off your shirt. But what shirt here means is the qamis of khilafat. Because Rasulullah spoke eloquently sometimes. He never said things directly. He wanted the Sahabas to kind of like understand what was being said. So Prophet ﷺ said to Uthman anhu that a time will come when they, the hypocrites, will want to remove the shirt from you. Not just his shirt, but shirt here means a shirt of khilafat. So Rasulullah ﷺ gave him clear commands, فَلَا تَخْلَعْهُ لَهُمْ, that when they want to remove the shirt, don't remove it. فَلَا تَخْلَعْهُ لَهُمْ, don't remove the khilafat, don't give up the khilafat. And I'll come back to this later on during the martyrdom, because the rebels were saying to Uthman anhu that we want you to step aside and give away the khilafat. Give it to somebody else. Now obviously Western historians, the way they will interpret that, or they will interpret that, Uthman anhu being power, like he wanted power, he wanted authority, he wanted control, he was power motivated, power hungry motivated, he didn't want to give up Khilafat, hence it led to the loss of his life. No, brothers and sisters, obviously they may interpret it in that way. Some people unfortunately may interpret it in that way. But the way we as Muslims interpret it is that the reason why Sayyidina Uthman al-Anhu did not give up Khilafat was not because of power orientated, wasn't because of power motivated, it wasn't because of Khilafat and power related issues. The reason why, brothers and sisters, he didn't give it up was so because of this hadith that Rasulullah told him clearly that when these munafiqs and these rebels would want to remove and take away the Khilafat, فَلَا تَخْلَعْهُ لَهُ, which means don't give it up. Don't give away the Khilafat. Don't give away the Khilafat, because I'm telling you it's a command from Allah. Until or unless they kill you, then so be it. But you voluntarily don't give up the Khilafat. And that was obviously, there's reason, wisdom behind why Prophet ﷺ said that. Because later on, we have another story of Hazrat Hassan radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Because after Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu's Khilafat, the next Khalifa was Hazrat Hassan radiallahu anhu. But for Hazrat Hassan radiallahu anhu, Prophet ﷺ prophesied that he should give up his Khilafat when Muawiyah radiallahu anhu wanted it. So Rasulullah told Hazrat Hassan that you will be doing something good then when you give up Khilafat and you hand it over to Muawiyah. This obviously we probably may look at when we do Sayyidina Ali's course later on in the month. But for Uthman there was clear directive not to give up the Khilafat. So these are three hadiths about the turmoil which talked about Sayyidina Uthman. Now moving along to the next part of Sayyidina Uthman's life biography. So we alhamdulillah touched on the first part. Now we're going to move on to the next part of Sayyidina Uthman's life, in particular how or what duty, what responsibility he had during Abu Bakr's time and Umar's time. And basically, in a nutshell, brothers and sisters, that during Abu Bakr's Khilafat and Umar's Khilafat, Sayyiduna Uthman was held in high esteem and high regard by both Umar and Sayyidina Abu Bakr. And high esteem in what way? In terms of Uthman was part of the Shura, i.e. the committee, where Sayyidina Umar in particular would take advice from. And he was one of those closest allies, or one of the closest allies of Sayyidina Abu Bakr that whenever decisions came, whenever mashwara and consultation was required, Sayyidina Abu Bakr would take mashwara and consultation and ideas from Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And I've just mentioned basically an example here. And this also shows at the same time Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu's great insight and his great understanding. So the story goes about that once Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he wanted to send a governor to Bahrain. He wanted to choose a governor for Bahrain. So he, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, asked Uthman radiallahu anhu that, "O Uthman, who should I send?" So Uthman radiallahu anhu suggested Ala ibn Hadrami. Ala ibn Hadrami, that you should send him as the governor of Bahrain. Now, why did Uthman radiallahu anhu say that for? The reason why is because during Prophet ﷺ's time, Prophet ﷺ sent Ala ibn Hadrami to Bahrain, and it was because of Ala ibn Hadrami that the people of Bahrain converted to Islam. because of Allah bin Hadrami, that people converted to Islam. So Sayyidina Uthman who thought that, look, if you send somebody else there, they may not know him and they may not have that connection. Whereas Allah bin Hadrami, because he was sent by Prophet ﷺ, because he was the one who converted them towards Islam, there's that connection. So they'll go there, they'll relate to Allah ibn Hadrami more than, say, for example, if you were to send another totally different Sahabi as a governor. You know, it's like, say, for example, a teacher who's already taught that class. So the students will be more inclined to trust that teacher, will be more inclined to kind of like, or actually they're more inclined to trust that teacher, and also they will be more equipped and would feel more comfortable because this teacher has already taught them. They know how this teacher works, they know the rules this teacher places, they know how that teacher wants certain things done. So because they know this teacher, so they probably will be better equipped to kind of learn the lesson or do good because they know this particular teacher. Whereas if it was somebody new, somebody different, then it takes them a while to adjust to new teachers. So exactly here, brothers and sisters, when it came to Uthman anhu, because Abu Bakr anhu was willing to send somebody totally different. Uthman anhu interrupted and he said, no, Abu Bakr, it would be a mistake if you were to send somebody else. Send Ala ibn Hadrami. He's part of Bahrain. He was there from before. He knows how everything works there. He knows the ins and outs of that particular area. He knows the custom and the cultures of that particular area. Not only that, but the people of Bahrain, they also accepted Islam on his hand. So if you send a totally different governor, they may quarrel against him, they may kind of go against him, they may rebel against him, they may do other kind of issues against him. So it would be far more better that you send someone trusted and tried for that particular region, and that is Allah ibn Hadrami. So when Uthman gave those beautiful wisdoms and insight, Abu Bakr listened to him, and he goes on to explain that he sent Allah ibn Hadrami as the governor of Bahrain. Some of the examples here of Sayyidina Uthman anhu, his effort during Abu Bakr anhu's time. Now, if you slightly move up that, during Abu Bakr anhu's time, as I explained before, that Abu Bakr anhu's Khilafat was only for approximately 2 years. But there was once a drought in Madina Munawwara. So there was hardly any food items in Madina Munawwara at all. So people, they were coming to Abu Bakr anhu, they were complaining, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, you're the leader and we have no food, come on, do something about it. So Abu Bakr anhu, he just told them to be patient. There was nothing else he could do because there were other issues going on at that time. The apostate wars with the murtads, with the apostates, he had other governmental issues to deal with. Don't get me wrong, that was also a governmental issue as well, but there wasn't anything in the Bayt al-Mal, anything in the reserves to help the Muslims. So what happened was that Abu Bakr anhu told the people to be patient. Now, as I was explaining to you before, that Uthman anhu, he was a trader. And even after migrating to Madina Munawwara, and I mentioned this in the course book as well, that he still continued to trade. And even after Prophet ﷺ passed away during Abu Bakr anhu's Khilafat, he still kept on trading. He would send business people, workers to Syria to trade. So what happened was that Uthman anhu was aware of the situation in Madina Munawwara, so he passed a message on to his workers in Syria that when you return back to Madina Munawwara, I want you to bring basically caravans of food. So the workers, they brought the caravans of food back to Madina Munawwara. So all the people of Madina Munawwara heard, oh, Uthman anhu has brought some food from Syria. So they all clamored and gathered around his house. So they were offering Sayyidina Uthman anhu large amounts of money. They said, oh, Uthman, will pay you 15 dirhams for 10 food parcels. Some were saying 12 for 10. Basically, they were offering Sayyidina Uthman a lot of money. Now, Sayyidina Uthman said to them that I will give you a better deal. And that is that basically I will give you one food parcel for 10. So the people are saying, well, no, that's actually doesn't work. That's actually charging us too much. It's too expensive. 10 dinars, 10 dirhams for one food parcel. So then Uthman explained, no, this is not what I mean. I mean the Quranic verse. Man ja'a bil hasanati falahu ashru amthaliha. That if you do one good deed, Allah gives you 10 reward. And what Hazrat Uthman is saying is that, do you know the food parcels? I'm going to give it out to you for free. You don't have to give me anything. Because for each food parcel I give you, for each morsel of food I give you, I'm going to get 10 rewards in the bank of the Akhirah. So that, subhanAllah, is Sayyidina Uthman generosity. Because at the time of famine and droughts, if people have food, they take advantage of people. They say, well, this person is desperately in need of food. Yeah, I'll give him a food parcel, but I'll charge him 100 dirhams, 100 pounds, 100 dinars. But Sayyidina Uthman donated everything away, and he said, yes, I will get my money back for this act of goodwill, but my money will be stored in the bank of the hereafter. And this is what this particular story is referring to regarding Sayyidina Uthman whose generosity and kindness. Moving on to the next part, the Diwan, keeping records. Again, this is something which Sayyidina Uthman started in Umar whose Khilafat. Was like keeping a record of those people who take something from the Baytul Mal, those who don't, people who go out for battles and jihad, those who don't, so that they could receive stipends from the Baytul Mal. So I think I did explain this in the previous course of Umar and I did mention that this was started in Umar whose time. But actually the brains behind this idea was Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala. Sometimes it happens that when a government or something starts something off an initiative, it's not the Prime Minister who starts it off, it's not the President who makes the idea. It's like one of his ministers behind, they make the idea. They are the brains behind it. But the leader, the President and the Prime Minister, he tends to get all the accolades. Oh yes, I started it off. So exactly here that, I know you will say in the books of history that this started during Umar whose time. But actually, the brains behind the idea was Sayyidina Uthman. He put the idea forward to Umar Umar agreed that that's a very brilliant idea, that basically you have stipends, you have a hisab, you have a record of those who have taken something from the Baytul Mal, those who haven't, so that those, when these people are in need and they haven't taken anything, we can give them something. Soldiers who are fighting, those who are trained soldiers, then we could give them stipends as well. So this idea of keeping a record and keeping a register and a diwan, this idea, initially the brainchild behind that was Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala. Okay, now moving on to the next part of Sayyidina Uthman whose Khilafat. And this is more about how he was chosen as a Khalifa of Islam. Now, as I explained in the earlier courses, that for when Abu Bakr was about to leave this world, he explicitly chose Sayyidina Umar. So clearly it was communicated to the companion Sahabas that Umar would be the next Khalifa. Now when it came to Umar leaving this world, when he was stabbed by Abu Lu'lu and then a few days later he then passed away, Sayyidina Umar he did not choose someone specifically, but rather he decided that there would be a shura, a committee of 6 companions, 6 people, and they would decide on the next Khalifa of the believers, the next Khalifa of the Muslims. So it won't be a specific person nominated by Umar anhu, but rather a committee of people will choose the next Khalifa to lead the Muslim Ummah. And if we have a look at the slide, brothers and sisters, he explains that Umar anhu chose 6 companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all of whom were fit to be Khalifs. Yeah, so they weren't like 6 people where you only have one who is actually fit to be the Khalifa, other 5 are not fit to be the Khalifa, because then that would not make it a fair process. That would then mean that the one who is fit to be the Khalifa, he will automatically be the Khalifa. So what's the point of having a committee? So the 6, they themselves, each and every single one of them, could be the next Khalifa. And he orders some troops, i.e. soldiers, to take a watch over proceedings. So the leaders, the commanders, the governors, they were told by Umar anhu that when I pass away and they are consulting who should be the next Khalifa, keep a watch over them. Make sure that they're not doing anything against the Book of Allah, against the Sunnah, that they are not oppressing anyone, they're not doing any khiyanat or any type of betrayal. And he also stipulated punishments for anyone who went against the Jama'ah. In other words, that anyone who doesn't agree with the nomination, so if the 6 of them nominated, or 4 or 5 of them nominated a person, like, okay, he should be the next Khalifa, so the ones who were going against that person, then severe and strict punishments should be given to that particular person. Why? Because he's now trying to cause ikhtilaf and differences. Now, if we have a look at the slide in front of us, it goes to explain that 6 people were chosen as the committee. That these 6 will decide who the next Khalifa should be. And the 6 here, brothers and sisters, are from the Ashara al-Mubashara. Yep, from those who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave them glad tidings in this world of Jannah and Paradise. So the 6 Sahabas, brothers and sisters, were Ali radiallahu anhu, Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anhu, Abdul Rahman bin Auf, Sa'id bin Abi Waqqas, Zubair bin Awwam, Talha bin Ubaydullah. So these are the 6 Sahabas from the Ashra al-Mubashara list who were chosen by Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab anhu, that you 6 amongst yourselves decide who should be the next Khalifa. Now there's a point here at the bottom, Sa'id bin Zayd. Now there's a companion called Sa'id bin Zayd. He's also from the Ashra al-Mubashara list as well. He's also from those companions who Rasulullah gave glad tidings of Jannah. Now a question arises as to why then wasn't he included in the list? If he was from Ashra al-Mubashara, why wasn't this Sahabi included from the list? So the reason why, brothers and sisters, he wasn't was because Sa'id bin Zayd, he was from the Banu Adi. And Banu Adi was the same tribe from which Sayyidina Umar was from. And you also see from the 6 people, Sayyidina Umar's son, Abdullah bin Umar, he wasn't part of the list as well. Why? What was the hikmah behind that? Subhanallah, that he didn't want anyone from his own clan to be chosen so that people don't get the wrong idea of favoritism. Because if he had put Abdullah bin Umar there from the list, then it could have been assumed that basically, Umar who wants to make his son the next Khalifa. If he was from Sa'id bin Zayd, somebody may then assume that, he wants someone from his own tribe, the Banu Adi, to be the next Khalifa. So that's why these 2 people quite clearly were stipulated by Umar that they're not going to be part of the list. They're not going to be part of the committee who is going to choose the next Khalifa of Islam. Inshallah, we'll continue with the after Salat al-Dhuhr. After Salat al-Dhuhr will be lunch, so we'll probably start around 1:45ish. Assalamu alaikum.